So Ala and I wanted to get together after the webinar earlier this week and answer some questions because we had so many come in. Instead of a typical blog, we thought it would be fun since we're all working remote to do a video. So we're gonna just shoot questions back and forth between us and have some fun and try and answer as many questions as we can in the time that we have available. We will also be available if people want to message us afterwards with questions. We'll answer those by email. But Ala, I'm going to get us started with a question here. What do you recommend for auction procurement in the current health climate, being sensitive to businesses who are experiencing hardship?
I think that's a fair question, and I think acknowledging that you're being sensitive to their hardships at the moment is important. That way you can frame your question and frame your ask differently than maybe you have in the past. So maybe when you approach those businesses, you can highlight the different ways that you will highlight them on their campaign page. So I think there's definitely, this is still a good time to ask. I think you just have to change the way that you do.
Differentiate your message a little bit and kind of help your organization stand out. If they get a letter from everybody, they're certainly not going to be able to help everybody. That makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And Brandon, what does the average auction look like?
So that's a really difficult question, being that there's not average. You want to use ratios based on your number of attendees. You don't ever want to have a 1-to-1 ratio, and I believe we're going to talk about that a little bit later of what the perfect ratio is. But look at more what the average fundraiser or event looks like. So in this day and age, about $75,000 is what an average event raises. That's several components. It's different size events. So that's kind of the middle ground we've seen, but it totally varies on your area, on your market. That's why the data is pulled together by market, and maybe eventually we'll even do it by state, because even in states things are different. I know in Chicago, even the city is different than the suburbs or in the smaller towns. So that's the best answer I can give for that one. But that one's kind of tough.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
All right. So we have someone who had kind of a bad experience with fair market value at a major auction last year. They kind of want to know, what are the reasons for hiding fair market value, if there are any?
Yeah, great question. So some campaigns will hide it in the hope that they will get more from that item of the fair market value if it's not visible. But if you have had a bad experience, that's reason enough to include it. So I think the fact that you're looking at your auction from last year, what your guests responded to, is great. So if your guest said no, it's no from us too.
Yeah, and there's really there's no harm in showing it. That just gives people kind of a benchmark of what that product is valued at. It does allow you to set a price. Some people may think something's less valuable than its actual price. So sometimes putting that in there is helpful, I think, too.
For sure. And if you're running an event at an auction at a national event in the fourth quarter, what data do you use to select your items that you want up for bid?
Yeah, this is directly from the research study. Where do I go to find the best data? So we do have national data available at the beginning of that presentation in the silent auction study. We have shared that out with everybody who registered. Hopefully you've been able to go in there, but in there you'll see a Q4 section that shows all the top performing items for Q4 on a national scale. But even if it's a national event, you do want to look at the different regions as well and see what items performed well in those quarters also, because there might be a variance. You might have a balance of people who are supporting you from a different specific market, where that helps you kind of sort through what'll work and what might not be as good.
Fair. Do we have any data that compares a live auction item versus a silent auction, and do we see that people have a higher return with a live auction than a silent?
So live auction, silent auction, we do have some data. We tried to parse it as best we could. The one challenge with live auction items on a platform like ours is most people don't put the fair market value in. So seeing that return or the starting bid price even sometimes isn't in there. All they have is what it's sold for. they got kind of funneled out of the data because they didn't have enough. So it is a challenge because we don't have tons of data behind the live auction, but we do know some, and we can probably provide a further deeper dive in the future, looking at that data and maybe seeing if more of that is included over the next year or so.
Mm-hmm. And the dollar amount of a live auction is typically much higher. So you might raise a lot more from one live auction item as opposed to 20 silent auction, but it correlates to the value of it. So you're, an effective live auction, you also want to make sure that you have people in the room that are interested in those live auctions.
Right. And there's only so many items that really work well for a live auction. There is a threshold where people are like, oh, another item. So you do have to balance your fundraising campaigns a little bit.
Yeah, and that's probably typically why we won't always see a fair market value, because live auction items are the ones that would be difficult for me to go into a store and buy. Those are items that are really special to the organization from the contacts that you have that are creating something for you.
And some of the best items are priceless. They're experiences. And I went to an event where I saw only one person in the world could have given the experience because this person was involved with the organization. They got that, and he couldn't give them a price for that. They went with their gut, and they had a great return on that. It didn't cost them anything, which is also nice. But sometimes with live auction items, that priceless is a better fair market value than anything else. And that means you're really going to get a great return. For a small school or a small nonprofit who's not incorporated auctions into their fundraising regularly, what's the initial expenditure, return on investment typically for something like that?
Yeah, so this was a tough question for me because we don't really have like a number to base it on that you'll increase, but I thought it would be helpful to kind of highlight that organizations that go from paper fundraising to online fundraising, we typically see a 20 to 30% increase, because of accessibility. So my advice to this school would be to start with the typical fundraising elements, such as, a relatively medium, small to medium size silent auction, maybe a giving tree, maybe an appeal. And then once you see that response from your constituents, start adding in more elements, more complex elements, such as a live auction, different types of raffles and paddle raise. So that would be my advice, is kind of, start with a manageable
starting point.
Yeah, manageable fundraising elements and add to that.
I think one crucial element might be just ask your donors what they're most interested in participating in. Do a quick survey after an event and see if they're craving more, or if they're at their limit. Get a little taste there too, because you never know. Maybe they're really excited about a silent auction, and you adding that will turn, maybe instead of it being 20% of your total amount raised, it'll grow, so there's opportunity there for sure.
Right. And I think it's great to see clients looking back more on their auctions, going through their items, going through their elements, and asking these questions. And I think we have this question like later on about, they're like, we want to scale back on our auction, we want to make it more lucrative, and asking these questions will help you get those answers. This is a great question, because sometimes you need different access to things. Is how do folks go about getting autographed sports items for their auctions? We see it a lot, but we've never talked about how do we actually get
so I came from the sports world. I spent 10 years in the industry, so I've shared this a few times on some of our webinars. There is a time of year for those types of things. When you look at auctions, we have spring and fall season. Well, sports have those seasons too. They have what they call signing days and signing sessions with their teams. So you do need to plan accordingly. Otherwise, you may not get an item that you really want. I often say, if you ask too late, you'll get the kicker's signature rather than the quarterback's. And we all know that sometimes the kicker is not the most popular player, and you're not going to get as much return. There is probably 70-80% of the industry is using technology now to take submissions. That is the easy way to say, okay, I can try and get something this way and go through here. I always tell people, try and find a connection separately. Tap into your board, tap into your constituents, and just ask. You have a local team that you've been trying to get something from. Reach out to your people in your ecosystem to see who might be a season ticket holder or have some connection there where they can put it in a request outside of the normal pipeline, because you're going to sit on a stack of papers. Otherwise, they get requests every day. This time of year, with everything going on, they're getting bombarded still, and they are in flux right now. They have some challenges that they can't really commit to giving tickets and things like that as easily. So you need to be mindful of that when you look at the sports teams. And the other way to do it is consignment. There are companies out there that have really cool autographed items that they will give to you for a price. There's two things you always want to make sure you have. Certificate of authenticity. If you don't have that, stay away from them. They're not a good vendor. And you want to make sure you have a desirable piece. Don't get the first item on the website, because everyone bought that item. In Chicago, everybody has one of the main Cubs players' autographs at this point, because he signed 1,000 million things after they won the World Series. That's just kind of how it goes. So you need to, one, think outside the box of who's going to be more appealing, and two, go outside the typical pipeline.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So for this next question, this is a specific scenario to an organization we work with in the Midwest. So they got a really exciting travel package as an auction item. And some of their committee members were worried that they would not see a high return on this item, and that, it's worth too much, and, we probably won't see a lot of bids on it. And so they're even concerned about putting it into the auction. So how do you talk to these committee members that are concerned, and where would you recommend starting these items?
So with a package that has what, some would say a high price or a high appeal, it's out of the ordinary, a good technique might be to reach out to people who might be interested in advance and promote it in advance. If it's something that has high appeal, unique, it's a travel package, like an exclusive package like that, there's nothing wrong with putting it out and into the ecosystem and letting people know, hey, we're going to have this. If you're interested, be ready to bid, and kind of, have your finger on the pulse in advance. That allows you to at least have some donors ready to come bid on that item. It's very common with live auction items, but you can also do it with silent auction items. The other thing to do is maybe look at packaging it with some other items, maybe a theme where you're going to see a little bit more value is added to it without much additional cost. And you're not going to lose money, but you'll make that package a little bit more appealing. That is a challenge. Obviously, having something so great that maybe people don't want to bid, that is scary, but also if you do your legwork, you're not going to have to worry about that as much. That will help you. I did have, when I was involved in an auction, I think it was 7 years ago now, one of the items I got donated, I ended up buying myself because I didn't actually reach out to see if anyone was interested in it. It was an exclusive, like one of 80 signed pictures that I thought should have absolutely gone for a lot, but I didn't prepare, and that was my fault. And I had people who probably would have been on it if they knew it was over there in the silent auction. So the technology allows you to do that. You can promote early. That makes it easier for them, but you definitely want to get the word out.
Right. You want to find those potential buyers and put them, in the quote unquote online room.
And the other option is to do an exclusive raffle for that and sell raffle tickets till you can't sell anymore, and then raffle it off, and you might get more out of it. If you sell 100 raffle tickets at 25 or $50 each, it's a pretty good return for just one item.
Mm-hmm. And it keeps it accessible to someone who might not want to spend that high dollar amount.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do we have next here? So we have a question about online auctions here, where when you're talking about online auctions, do you have to purchase an app or something from a company that handles these kinds of auctions? Or can we utilize just social media to hold an online auction?
Yeah, fair question. So you typically purchase access to a platform, but no app is required For GiveSmart, you can certainly use social media to promote your auction or fundraising campaign, but they won't capture information like phone number, email, credit card, which is kind of the things that you want to procure payment and make sure that, the money that you fundraise actually hits your bank accounts.
Right. Well, I think the other thing is the ability to text message and really be top of mind. We all have social media, but maybe not every donor has it. Every donor has text message on their phone. We can 100% guarantee that at this day and age, as we all know.
For sure. So we have a client, they're hosting a fundraising gala in January. They have an online silent auction component, online live auction component for guests that are attending, but now they're thinking about opening up the silent auction to more than just the attendees and make it available to everyone. Is that something you would recommend?
I think we both would agree on this. I absolutely recommend that. It allows you to expand your reach, increase the competition, and potentially make a whole lot more on some items that maybe some people in the room aren't as keen on, but people outside of them would be interested in. You have to factor in any kind of needs for shipping and that kind of thing always with these types of auctions, but you do have the ability to work with that person directly once they purchase, and they can come pick them up, or you can coordinate shipping with them. But I highly recommend this. It's a great way to engage new people that aren't ready to buy tickets to an event, couldn't make it to your event, or if you're going completely online, your event's been postponed, or you're canceling it potentially, this sets you up already to be successful.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And I love something that we say on our team is look outside the room and kind of use the power of those that are not physically present.
Yeah, we have a lot of content around going outside the room, thinking beyond the four walls. And, if you ever have any questions on those things, we have a whole resource center on that. So I think it's a really great way to think beyond just the auction. There's all the other components that you can take outside the room as well.
Mm-hmm.
So next question here, what are some effective ways to get people to register for your auction if you're not holding a live event anymore?
Totally get it. Some things that I've seen physically at events that I think translate well in this online space is the idea of a door raffle or a registration raffle. So this is absolutely free to your guests, and you're saying like everyone who registers by this date will be entered into our raffle, and then you guys can randomly generate a winner, and they can get a gift card or some sort of basket or anything that you think of. But I think a free raffle that's accessible to your guests is a great way to get them to register.
And we're seeing a lot of creative things right now. There's an organization we're going to be doing a webinar with that actually revamped their homepage a little bit with just a widget that invited people to sign up for the raffle. And then when the auction was live, they just swapped the language, and it was for the auction. It was really a clean way to promote and get people to sign up.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. In terms of building a catalog, what would you recommend for a balance of items with a low fair market value that can potentially increase bids for event attendees, and having items that have a higher fair market value but might have a higher return?
So that's why I emphasize one data point's not going to be the only decision maker. You need to look at all of it because you want a mix of both. I wouldn't say it always has to be 50-50, but you want to look at your donor base and what typically is donated. If more donations are towards the $100 level than they are the $5,000 level, then you probably want to skew a little bit more towards that side. If you don't know, if you've just not been able to measure that data before, you want to go 50-50 at first, but also see what you can find. If you can't get as many of those $5,000 packages, it doesn't hurt to add a few more of the smaller priced items, as long as you stay within the ratio. And I think we're going to ask that right now. Is there a good ratio of number of items to guests? Look at that. Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. So I would say have less items than guests. So, the less items you have, the more guests, the more bids that we see. So typically I think one item for every 4 to 5 guests should work, but we've seen major online auctions with like 50 items. 5,000 registrants, and like that's where we see the most amount of bids and activity. So just keeping that in mind of
All about
creating more
competition,
competition.
right?
Hmm.
You don't want everyone to go home with something. As much as nice as that is, they should go home with a grab bag. Not everyone should have a silent auction item, right? They should crave it, but not everyone should be able to win. Otherwise, it's not as appealing. They'll just move to a different item if they can't win one of them.
Hmm.
That makes total sense. And a follow-up question to that. So what's the general timeline of an online auction? How long should it run? We
Hmm.
also we'll kind of pile on, when should you open that auction? How
Hmm.
are
I think there are a few things to think about. Is this an online auction that is strictly online, or is this an online auction that's, by the end of it, you will have some sort of maybe live element
Mhm.
online? And so those are fair questions. So I think if it's strictly online, 2 weeks sounds good to me. What's even more important that in those 2 weeks than just the timeline is the communication that you have with your guests, and constantly reminding them about when the auction is closing, encouraging them to get their bids in now. One thing that we when we're kind of bidding concierges at different places, we say is the bidding is never going to get lower than it is now. It's only going to go up. So those are things we want to constantly remind
Mhm.
the guests. Like we want to make sure that they know that now is the best time to bid, not the end when everything is
Right.
going up and you might lose out.
Prices aren't going down.
Nope, no discounts here. And so definitely keeping that communication going, reminding them, highlighting different items is super important in any sort of campaign. I'd say it's even more crucial during an online one. I think if you have some sort of like live event or a Facebook Live or anything or streaming service that you are doing in addition to your online auction, I think a week is fair, is because you kind of scheduled time where you'll see your auction grow the most, which is going to be during that live portion.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's a good point. If you're doing a streaming, it's still a live event in some aspect because there's a finish point.
Mhm.
Um, is a week before probably the best measurement for when you're doing that live component. So if I'm streaming on Saturday, we probably want to start the auction about the Saturday before.
Mhm. Saturday before, I always like to do it on a weekday, like during business hours,
Mm-hmm.
while people are still kind of like on their phones, going through their email. And so I want to get their interest when I know that they're looking on their phone. So maybe Saturday night, they're probably focusing on dinner with their family or something like that.
Right.
So I think it's important to think about, like, when would you open up this email? When would you register?
That makes sense for sure. Another question here. What are thoughts on extras, for example, a 50-50 or a raffle to win a prize? I mean, I think we kind of covered that already, but just reiterating.
Hmm. Actually, I love this question, and we did talk about it a little bit earlier. And what we've said is you want to keep your auction accessible to everyone in the room, and so that's why we recommend having a mix of high end items, low end items, medium, because we want everyone in the room to be able to participate. So not everyone that can bid in the live auction is in the room, but there are plenty of people that can participate in a raffle and feel comfortable giving there. Not everyone even wants to bid in the silent auction, and we have to acknowledge that and give them something else that they can give in a different way. So whether that's at 50-50, that raffle, I love a good giving tree or a wish list, anything to keep it accessible in the room is good for
Blindfold.
you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a win every time, that feels great to everyone. So I think it's important to think like, where am I getting like a high ROI per item, but also where are these like little places during my event that I can also fundraise. And it's pretty easy to do it, through GiveSmart. You don't have to set up anything more than an item, and it runs itself.
Makes total sense and obviously easy to do with technology.
Mhm. This is a sensitive question. Is it okay to solicit auction items during this time? How are organizations going about soliciting these items?
So very, very pertinent question. And I think in any time where there's challenges out there, we've in the last 5 to 6 years, unfortunately, had instances where there was a natural disaster or something affecting businesses in the area. And one thing to keep in mind is we always want to be mindful. We always want to be respectful of the fact that people are going through challenges, but your mission and what you're working for still is very important to this day of what you're trying to accomplish. And people still believe that. They're just going through stuff. So being respectful in how you approach it is obviously the number one thing. And then look at your donors that are already in the ecosystem. People who have already donated to you are going to be more accessible, and someone you can sit down and talk with and get a taste for where they're at right now. Ask them the questions and give them the opportunity to be flexible with how they donate an item. If they say, we really can't do something for the fall where it would expire in the fall, we don't know if we're going to be recovered by then, or something to that extent, create some flexibility with the use of a donation item or the access to a donation item. And even if you get a verbal commitment of, we know you're going to be in the fall, we want to support you, we can't commit to exactly what, at least you can hold that as something you're going to get out of that organization. You can still build your silent auction off of that. It is difficult. We're definitely mindful of it and understand the challenges. There's so many different challenges when you have so much going on like we do. But the big thing is that they do want to support you, and they will find a way over time. These businesses, and we're seeing it today with organizations that are setting up auctions for their own employees to support their employees. So there are organizations out there that want to give. People are giving all the time still. We've raised over $50 million in the last 2 weeks. There's a lot going on.
That's impressive.
It's it's very impressive, and I'm hoping we continue to build off of that, because there's so much opportunity for organizations to be creative in this time and with what's going on, and we're seeing such really cool examples, which we'll be sharing. So hopefully that answers the question. Very difficult question, but I think we're hopefully putting ourselves in a position to succeed with everything.
Absolutely. And just to pivot a little, we get this question as customer success managers often, but we'd love to hear kind of your thoughts as well. Is, can online auctions negatively impact attendance at a physical event, or does the extended reach far outweigh attendance?
So I think you and I probably have a very similar take on this. It does not affect attendance because people still want to attend and support. You will have some, you may have a handful, but the extended reach allows those that can't attend to participate. And I think that almost always outweighs a few people not able to attend or changing their mind at the last minute. They still have those other components of the social atmosphere of your event. As everyone's now going virtual and looking at different ways to do it online, it's so much more important now to have people already engaged with you online so they can just jump in and support you. Is that kind of along the lines of what you would say on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of get outside the room, open up kind of the doors into your event, and you'll see that it's beneficial to everyone. At the end of the day, people will still go to have that, face-to-face communication, enjoy it. But there are people that, might not be able to make the event because they have, other obligations or,
Right.
something else on the schedule, and why not have them participate? So totally
Right.
on the same page.
And at the event, instead of going straight to the silent auction and shopping, those people may be engaging more with you and the rest of your donors and enjoying their time more because they've already done their shopping. They know what they're bidding on. It's on their phone. And we see it all the time where people are like, well, there's no one looking at the silent auction. I'm like, well, everyone's on their phone. So that's the nice.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's something our clients start to appreciate, that their guests appreciate. They're like, I'm so happy I don't have to be stuck behind, a piece of paper and pen, just like hoping no one bids on my item. Like, I've heard horror stories, like people like steal pens, like crazy stuff like that to make sure that they have their hands on an item.
I have a horror story where two gentlemen who had a little bit too much to drink tripped each other and broke a table and just knocked everything off. There was wine bottles on the table. It was to the extreme, but they each wanted that box of wine, and it's a little bit more enjoyable when they don't have to do that.
Right, they can just use their thumbs instead.
Exactly, they can still be competitive standing next to each other, just a little bit less aggressive.
For
Um,
sure.
a little bit more of a specific question here that I think really fits well with a lot of the conversations we're having. Organization has a really successful live auction, but their silent auction is getting a little bit too big, as in just handling it. They say they have about 450 items, 325 packages, so they are packaging already, but they're only getting 2 or 3 bids per item. So as we looked at the data, we saw that really trying to get around 7 was the average. So they're below average there, and they know it. What are the recommendations? They're considering scaling down the number of packages and items. Um, I'm, I don't know. 500 guests is how many they have. So what would you recommend based off of the information we have there?
So I think as you were reading this question, and I'm sure as this customer wrote this question, they were probably answering it to themselves. They're like, yeah, we absolutely need to scale down. And it's not necessarily that you're trying to like do less work for yourself, but you want to be more effective in the
Mhm.
tasks that you're doing. Like one of the great things about this technology is that we want to give you your time back so you can focus on the mission of the organization as opposed to like putting baskets together and putting in certificates. And it's a lot of work. So if
Right.
you can have scale down your auction and you see a higher ROI per item, that's awesome. Like you should definitely consider doing it. And it's definitely something we would advocate for. And it sounds like this customer wants to do it too.
For sure. And, it's a good problem to have if you get those same number of items donated, because you can run online auctions once a month to your constituents and donors and just say, hey, this is our monthly grab bag of items, or this is our raffle. And you can be a little bit more creative throughout the year, being more year round focused with those other donated items that maybe don't go into the auction at the event.
For
Um,
sure. Yeah. This is a pretty relevant question to the current climate. Any best practices for recently completed auctions which have kind of finished up and have several sporting events and experience coming up? We're concerned about refund requests.
Very valid concern. But I do think that the teams and organizations running these events and these companies are putting themselves in a position to be resourceful for you. So reaching out to the donor who donated that item and let them know, hey, so and so bought this. If you have the data, which hopefully you do, they may try to redeem it, but obviously there's not much we can do. Can we extend? And can we offer that extension to this person so they can get the value out of it, and position it as they're really excited to get an experience from your organization. So Chicago, and I say, Chicago Bulls are not playing right now. The NBA is not playing right now, but a donor won a suite, premium suite at a game, and we're not going to be able to fulfill that. I would reach out to the person who donated that item and say, listen, can we extend this, and what are the options? Do that now before you get those refund requests, because then you're being proactive and you're helping out the donor before they even get to the hassle, because they may not even remember until they're ready to use it, or they find it one day and they say, shoot, I won this, I want to use it, but there's no Broadway theater right now, so what do I do? And they'll reach out to you, and you don't want to deal with that conversation without having a plan in place. So that's what I would do.
Yeah, I'm definitely on board with that. I think the most important word that you said is proactive. Is you know that someone's probably going to reach out to you anyway. So if you can get ahead of it, before they even come to you, they'll probably appreciate that, and you'll have a lot more flexibility with that buyer, as opposed to if they came to you and they just like remember that they spent a lot of money on this package and they don't know what's going to happen with it. So getting ahead of it is important.
And the worst thing that's going to happen is it's going to be a difficult conversation for a few minutes, but that person still wants that experience. And if you can make it work with the company as well that donated it, it's a win-win.
For sure.
A question that I think is sparked from the data that we were looking at. Do you think wine and spirits do better when there are multiple items combined, or less bottles in a package for a greater return?
That's a great question. Some of the data showed like wine and spirits does well all the time. I think you also have to look at the type of bottle or the liquor that it is. So, maybe if it's like a high-end whiskey or, a really rare wine, like selling that on its own does make sense. You don't really need to add to it to up the
Mhm.
value of the package. But if you have, a few bottles of, medium shelf wine or medium shelf liquors, it might do well to kind of build it as a package. So I think having that variety, but looking at the initial fair market value of that wine or spirit will help you better decide.
Yeah. And if you look at the fair market value for those packages, you want to try and be in that area because that's where they perform the best. So if a great example in Kansas City, there's a brewer that makes a chocolate ale. Only one time of the year they make only a limited amount of them. So if you're an organization that gets this big bottle of chocolate ale, you have a really great auction item that stands on its own. But
Mhm.
the wine and breweries in the area that just put together standard packages for you may not reach that same fair market value on their own. Therefore, you package them.
Right. And also that specific example, like the chocolate ale, that sounds very specific to the region,
Right.
and someone who in that market would know the value of it, but maybe someone else in like a different state, maybe they'll look it up, but maybe they won't like recognize it
Right.
initially.
Right. Yeah. You definitely need to know your audience with it as well.
Hmm. Hmm. And Brandon, are you seeing a trend towards customers minimizing the silent auction and focusing more on the live auction or live asks, such as an appeal?
So we do see the appeal is probably one of the most popular things that people are trying to add and do more of. I'm sure you see that a lot, but I don't think anyone's really going from minimizing silent to the live, especially right now, as we know most things are going online. I don't know that there's a trend either way. I think it's more of a consistent growth on the live asks and people being more creative. We talk about gamification a lot, and that is becoming more popular, trying to have something that's different than other people in the area so you can get a little bit more, be a little bit more creative and stand out. But the trend really is the going to technology, and that's been a trend for the last 5 or 6 years. As we all know, we've been doing this for a while. It's a lot easier to do a silent auction by using technology, and that's where the silent auction has grown, and seeing more of a variation, and people are being more creative with their silent auctions because they have more ability to do those, and that helps the live auction too because you can put more time into it. Would you
Hmm.
agree, disagree?
Yeah, I would say sometimes I see customers like scale down on their silent auctions. I've seen some clients who have experimental years and they try to, move away from it, but ultimately they end up coming back to it because it is something that's accessible. But I do love the trend of seeing more elaborate live asks and live appeals. I think
Mhm.
one of the themes that kind of we talked about during this Q&A is like, don't be afraid to ask. You have to ask the question in order to get, the answer. Like maybe it's a no now, yes later. And so I love that our clients are being more forward with their live asks. And there's a correlation. The softer your appeal, the less people will donate, the more you are in someone's face, sharing that video, having that testimonial on stage, having someone lead it, the more of a yield we'll see in those live asks. So it's a trend that I do appreciate.
Yeah, somewhat minimization, but more like just less items and more packaging and being a little bit more strategic with the silent auctions, I think makes sense.
For sure. And Brandon, do you recommend mobile bidding for a demographic 50 plus?
Absolutely. We have several stories over the last 9 years of just some of the donors that appreciate the most are the ones you may think have the most challenges with technology. And I don't want to make the assumption that 50 plus they have challenges with. My parents are well above that. And I know, sometimes they might fall into that whole challenge with technology, but my wife is not in that, and she has challenges with technology sometimes. So I don't think that's an age thing. It's more that demographic. Many think, oh, they're more traditional and they want to do the traditional thing, but we did actually do a survey, a whole data study on this, and the generations are starting to really line up together. So 50 plus, or some would call the baby boomers, and the mature aged donors are buying in more and more on silent auctions online and things that make it easier. So they don't have to get up from a table and go walk over to a silent auction. they are using their phones and they feel really cool when they do it. So we are seeing that more and more. So the trend and what we're seeing is people are embracing it. Boca Raton has a hospital in the area where, as we all know, Boca Raton is retirement primarily area where the average age is much higher than many other cities. And they have an incredible live ask they do with all technology. And they use a lot of the same components as you would use in a live ask with paddles and an auctioneer, but they also have a thermometer showing how much they've raised, and those different things to really get that crowd engaged. And that's what we're seeing. What about on your end? I mean, you guys,
Yeah.
a lot more customers than I do.
And so one thing that when clients bring up this question, I totally hear it. I see the concern, but I also like to remind them, like, technology is not something we're going to go backwards with. You
Right.
know, electronic giving is not something we're going to go backwards with. If anything, it's going to grow in popularity. So, you know, I think every kind of month, every year, it's less of an issue for guests and donors because it is the norm. And so that's pretty cool that you know that
Yeah.
at some point the technology will catch up with everyone and we'll kind of all get on the same wavelength, like you said.
Exactly. So a question here that we wanted to quickly answer is, how do you assess the fair market value of items that are discounted, like wine? Do you use list price, deepest discount, median price? How do you usually do that for fair market value?
Fair market value, I think you should put the retail value. So whatever it would be, you know, when it just came out into this in the store at the highest value. You know, I think if you can get it discounted, that's great.
Mhm.
You know, the question that we're asking that your guests are curious about is, what is the fair market value, not how much did you pay? So I think retail value is totally fair.
Yep, I totally agree with you on that.
So this is a question we got a little bit earlier, but it seems to be very popular. So I think people want to know is, we've postponed our gala from spring to fall. What are your thoughts for asking for silent auction items now, even though the event is 6 months out?
I would say do your research. Start identifying what you want to get in your silent auction. If there's different things that you want to have versus what you would have in your spring event, now is a great time to do that research and start reaching out to people who are already involved with you. New people, I would probably wait, or I would do more investigation to see if you have some in or relationship to build off of. We want to be mindful that people are in a tough time, but there's nothing wrong with starting to plan and get things lined up and know what packages you want to get. So when you do outreach to new people, you're ready to go. So pre-planning, very important. Research, very important. It sounds like this person has ran an event before in the spring. So look at your spring event and identify what you want to make sure you have for your fall event.
True, because there might be some items that will translate
Mhm.
easily into the fall.
So a specific question, this is, kind of really related to the technology, but do you recommend a buy it now versus an auto bid?
So I have a pretty strong stance on this. So I've always recommended auto bid over a buy it now. While the buy it now, it's great because you can potentially get someone just to buy it, you know, right off the bat. It does create a ceiling on your bidding. And so we typically recommend, so say the item is worth $100, you want to make the buy now price like double or even triple what the value is. So like $300,
Mm-hmm.
because we really want to put a premium on it for someone to close out the bidding for everyone. But if there's someone that's willing to pay $300, just offer it. Maybe there's someone who's willing to pay more. And so putting buy nows on all your items is, you can essentially, you do that, you can calculate what the ceiling on your silent auction is.
Right.
Whereas if we just have auto bid, it could surpass that.
Right. And just for clarification's sake, auto bid is when donors can set where they would stop bidding on an item, right? So they could set their own ceilings.
Right. So they say, you know, this item is great. The most I would bid at this moment is $150. The system will bid on your behalf up until that amount. If someone outbids you, you'll get notified, but you still have a chance to go back and raise your auto bid
Right.
and raise your ceiling. And you could do that multiple times until the auction closes.
Right. So your ceiling is unpredictable, but it could be a whole lot higher than what the buy now would be. Makes sense. With online or virtual auctions, should anyone stay away from items that have to be shipped?
So this is a fair question. I would definitely check with the local like laws of your state of what they do allow you to ship, what they require if you're shipping it to somewhere else, so that it will be kind of change per organization. So I would make sure that you do the research on that. And of course, if you're shipping anything, think about the item, make sure it's well packed, has a lot of, whether bubble wrap or anything, because you do want to make sure it gets to the buyer safely.
Yeah, especially with like alcohol, where there's probably rules.
Yeah, exactly. For alcohol, I would probably recommend like keeping it local if you can, doing like a porch drop off, doing like a pickup hour, just so you have a little bit of less of that liability. But if someone does want it shipped, you can kind of maybe give them a little disclaimer.
Yeah, put a little note in there. That's all the questions. We did pretty good, under an hour. Hopefully we gave answers that helped, and then we'll get this out to everybody. And if there's further follow-up questions, we're available to answer those. But I appreciate it, Ala. That was fun to kind of rack through those and see what people were concerned about.
Same to you, Brandon. This was a great time.
Awesome. Thanks,